Shikama na afarakatu. And first, I would like to say welcome. And not only welcome, but welcome to the new lesson series 400. And this is the introduction 401. Before I jump into that introduction, of course, I would love to show my appreciation, my continued appreciation for all those who do not only participate in these lessons and questions, but I want to give a particular form of appreciation right now because I'm noticing a lot of people, a lot of our people, not only on the frequency and the little things that we try to do in the videos and whatnot, but I'm noticing a shift in the paradigm of thinking and consciousness of our people all over, and at all ages and in all genders, because I've noticed a boom, you may as well say, in young people, our young Afarakatu, who are opening their minds and shifting their trains of thought from the European, as the great Dr. Marimba Ani says, the European Yurugu, back into our consciousness. And they're asking questions. And as been said by scholars such as the great Taj Tariq Bey, we have to get the babies. We have to educate them while they're young. So I notice a lot of young men and women who are into this movement. But I also would love to give a special recognition to our women, because I've noticed a great number of our women who are fighting in this battle for the consciousness of our Afarakatu. And this is a great thing indeed, because it shows that these efforts that we exert, not just men, not just scholars, but all people who, as Malcolm said, the great Malcolm said in 1964, all people who are fighting for human rights and not just civil rights. See, this is an awakening of our people worldwide. So I want to say continue everything you are doing, because it is not only being recognized by me, which is probably the least important recognition, but it's being recognized and realized by everyone, including the ones who may be your own children. This is a great thing indeed. So continue your works, and we see light at the end of the tunnel, and we will make this a realization. Now, as you can see, I have a little enthusiasm in my voice right now because lesson series 400 is exciting to me. And this is because it is the introduction to language, the philology, linguistics, and etymology of some of these languages that we study so diligently, but may not get the full understanding of these languages. And as I said before, I've been working hard at this lesson. A lot of study, a lot of research. And one particular person who I would like to give credit to in helping me with some of the things and elements pertaining to the translation of language, and his name is Ferg Somo. And he's probably one of the most knowledgeable, if not the most knowledgeable scholar that we have today in the study of linguistics, philology, and etymology when it comes to languages of Afaraka. And he's been a great help to me. So I would like to give a special thanks to him for this. And in addition, I would also like to give a special thanks to a mind on the frequency. I will leave the name out, but you know who you are, who gave me the idea to partake in a very large translation project. And in doing so with this particular project that this person suggested, in parallel is why I got the idea to do lesson series 400, dealing with this ancient Egyptian language and Hebrew language and connections and things like that. So I would like to say thank you also. And as I said, you know who you are. With that said, this lesson series is going to be very interesting, because I'm trying to take things into a direction that may not have been thought of before. Okay. The idea that the ancient Egyptian language, I would just say that because we would get into the proper pronunciation of that language and the proper meaning of it. But until then, I will say ancient Egyptian language. When we talk about this ancient Egyptian language, we should already know that this was an African language, a language of Afaraka, which would be considered Ki Afaraka, because languages of Afaraka, particularly Ba and Tu, oftentimes have the word ki or the prefix ki in front of it. And if not ki, it has the prefix chi, You know, these are details that could be studied, and I will present some of them as I go along. So the fact that the ancient Egyptians spoke these pure Afro-Rakatu languages, that's not something new. But throughout this course of this lesson series 400, I will be showing also the misinterpretations and misunderstandings of the so-called Hebrew language and how that also is a key Afro-Raka, a language of Afro-Rakatu. I will show and prove how there is no such thing as an Asiatic language or an Afro-Asiatic language. That's just Eurocentric study and protocol. Again, of course, trying to divide our people, such as trying to divide the Khoi and San people from the rest of the so-called black Africans, because they don't want you to know that the San and the Khoi are the first humans. You know, the Ba-Intu are also some of the first humans with the Khoi and San. So if they separate that, then they also can separate the languages and the connections of the languages. Well, people, we can't be blind to this any longer. And we refuse to be blind to this any longer. With that said, I'm going to give you a little introduction because I want to hurry up and jump into what we're getting into here. We have to first, for those who argue with this so-called Afro-Asiatic language, those of the Mediterranean, and you all know who that is. Normally you see it on these maps. They're the yellow on the colored maps up in the north, trying to separate it from the rest of Afro-Raka. But when we study the ancient Egyptian language, we oftentimes study it on the basis of this so-called Afro-Asiatic language. So when we translate some of the things or mistranslate some of the words and phrases and terms of the language, we do so on the basis of this falsified Afro-Asiatic language group. So therefore, we miss a lot of the overstandings of what these languages mean and some of the terms and words actually mean, because we don't connect it to its proper origins. So that's something that we will be clearing up throughout this lesson series. And I say that because we have to dispel this myth that we have only been speaking these languages and these ancient Egyptians only came around 6,000 or 7,000 years ago. See, this is just basically an explanation of our story by these so-called European Egyptologists or these Arabic Zahi Hawasis for explaining our people away to other groups of people. All right. So to dispel that myth ahead of time, I want to go ahead and say that, for example, this current year, 2011, of our Gregorian year, our Gregorian calendar, that is, this is actually year 38,777 of the year of the Great Ra, according to the ancient Egyptian calendar and keeping of time. So if we look at it, even the year of the Great Ra, even though this is nearly 39,000 years of the Great Ra, according to the ancient Egyptian calendar, this here is still a rather recent time of our story in ancient Egypt. So we have to get rid of that myth that we have to just be studying our language according to the last 6,000, 7,000 years. Why is that so? Because if there is anything older than 6,000, 7,000 years, then these Europeans and Arabs know they can't include themselves in our story. See, so they have to make you think it's more recent than it really is, because if it were any older and more ancient and antique into history, then therefore they could not include themselves. So that should dispel that myth. The second thing, and this heads toward my African scholars, my scholars, Qua Afro-Rakatu. I hate to say it, but a lot of times these misunderstandings of our languages and translations and the way that we teach about this Kemet, as you say, about this Kam and Kim, these misunderstandings of these languages, they lead us to a very biased view. Now, understand that, as the great Amos Wilson said, we need to take information and Africanize it. You know, if the Jews can Judaize their information and include themselves in everything, including our story, why can't we re-include ourselves in our story? You know what I mean? But what I will say is that some of our scholars do so with the view of myopia because they do so without the proper understandings of the origins of these languages. So when they fight about Kemet, meaning black people or the land of the black people rather than the black land, and they argue about meaning black, and things like that, you're arguing still, and I understand where you're coming from, but you're arguing with the misunderstanding and mistranslation of the words. You're still doing an improper argument. So this is to help even my great scholars understand some of these things. Now, where do I get this idea from? Through the great Dr. Malachi York. Everybody has information that they can get from someone. So it's up to you to be wise and rational in what you pick and choose to synthesize the best information to make it work for you. But one thing Dr. York said, and he made this profound statement, that if you want to know the real meaning behind something, all you have to do is look at the names. And he was specifically talking about the Bible and how you can take the Bible and translate the names to get the real meaning of what the stories are saying. But I'll take that and I'll apply it a step further here. We're going to take these elements and we're going to apply it to the entire language family of the ancient Egyptian and also subsequently the Hebrew. Now, with that said, what I want to say is that so many of these interpretations that we've already tried in these arguments from our own are based on misinterpretations. So one of the first misinterpretations I would like to clear up is the word that is spelled in ancient Egypt as K-M. K-M. All right. Now, this word K-M is oftentimes mistaken as Kim or Kam or Cam or however you want to pronounce it. Now, these terms are taken to mean black. Now, while it may be true that Kim or Cam or Kam or Kami or Kimmy, these are variations that mean black in some languages. Yes, they are. It is not so the case when we are referring to the so-called ancient Egyptian, whether referring to the people completely or referring to the land itself. Now, why do I say this? Well, then we have to get into a little bit of history, a little bit of our story. Excuse me. Don't hate me for saying that. A little bit of our story. One thing we have to understand is that, believe it or not, and people have argued with me about this many a times when we're talking about the so-called Pat or Punt and things like this. I ask people, since they were not the original people, where did the people that settled those lands come from and who were they? So getting into a little bit of the history, whether we're talking genetics or linguistics or whatever, archaeological, the ancient Egyptian language, being that it was established predominantly by Bantu people, obviously the language element was predominantly Bantu. We will also get into how Hebrew was predominantly a Bantu language. Now, how do I say that? Well, I'll give you one example. That great statue, and like I said, until we get to this lesson, I will call it the Sphinx. Regardless of what they tried to do to explain away this monument, our people and our scholars have always known that the head and face that sits atop that lion body is the head and face of a Batwa Bantu. So like I said, we've always known that. And to take it a step further, throughout the Nile Valley civilization, two very prominent images in the spiritual practices were Ptah and Bes. Later on throughout the lesson series, we'll get into the proper pronunciation of those words I just mentioned. But Ptah and Bes are also Batwa Bantu symbols in the spiritual practices. And this has not really been known by many of the scholars that present our story to us, but it's a fact that needs to be known so we can get more of a proper understanding of what's being said here. Because in many of the places of the Nile Valley, Ptah, as you call, is also considered the creator of all things. So that's very important, that a Batwa Bantu is considered the creator of all things.